Greetings, everyone. Truth Surge here again. Glad you could join me. Hope everyone's doing okay. We are talking about Christian origins. We are looking at the Jesus myth theory. If you haven't checked out the other videos, you might want to look at those and get caught up to speed. One thing I wanted to mention, an observation, and I didn't plan this, and I didn't do it deliberately. I'd like to say that I did, but I didn't. So far, all I have presented is positive evidence for the earliest Christian belief. I've only presented positive evidence to support the idea of a mythical Jesus, a Jesus who had always been in heaven and had never been on earth. I have not presented any negative evidence against the historical idea of Jesus. I haven't presented any absence of evidence, any silence in the epistles of the historical Jesus or the gospel Jesus. And I think that's very interesting because, like I say, I didn't plan it, but if we build a cumulative and strong case for the mythical Jesus, what does that do to the historical Jesus? Well, anyway, we'll still have to look at the Gospels at some point, and we still need to answer the question of how Christianity originally came about in the first place. Lots of questions that we have to look at. Just to recap real briefly, we saw in previous videos that Jesus was not going to return to earth. He was going to appear for the first time. We saw that the earliest Christians believed Jesus was the first to come back from the dead, first before anyone else. And we saw explicitly he was said to have been killed at the creation of the world, when the world was created. We've looked at these pieces of evidence, and they seem to be fitting together like puzzle pieces, supporting the next piece. Well, in this video, we're going to answer the question of who killed Jesus. If he was never on earth to begin with, who killed him? It couldn't have been the Romans. Couldn't have been the Jews. So who killed Jesus? Well, our search has to begin with the Apostle Paul. Who did Paul believe had crucified the Lord of glory? Let's find out.
We all know the gospel version. The Jewish religious leaders had Jesus arrested in a twisted plot to give double responsibility, both to the Jewish leaders and the Roman government. But did Paul believe that the Roman government or the Jews had anything to do with Jesus' death? Let's look at a very interesting passage by Paul regarding the Roman government from where else? The book of Romans. For rulers are not a terror to good works, but to evil. Do you want to be unafraid of the authority? Do what is good, and you will have praise from the same. For he is God's minister to you for good. But if you do evil, be afraid. For he does not bear the sword in vain. For he is God's minister, an avenger to execute wrath on him who practices evil. Is it conceivable that Paul would say that the innocent need not fear the Roman rulers if he thought those same Roman rulers had in fact put to death an admittedly innocent man, Jesus of Nazareth, just 20 years earlier? The fact is, nowhere in Paul's 7 authentic letters does he ascribe culpability to the Romans or the Jews for Jesus' death. So, if Paul does not implicate the Romans or the Jews in Jesus' death, then who or what did Paul believe killed Jesus? Does he give us any indication of his belief on the matter? The following passage from Paul's first letter to the Corinthians gives us the answer, but we'll need to do some serious detective work in order to clarify exactly what Paul is saying. None of the rulers of this age understood it, for if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. Now we know exactly who Paul believed crucified Jesus. The problem is, his language is not explicit, and we struggle to understand his true meaning for many reasons. Translation issues, deliberate euphemisms, the powerful influence of the gospel story, and so on. Now, at face value, it may seem that Paul is implicating the Roman government for the death of Jesus. The rulers of this age may sound like Paul has the Romans in mind, But is it possible that Paul was speaking of some other group when he wrote the phrase rulers of this age? Remember, we just heard Paul tell the believers in Rome that the Roman government is not to be feared if they do good. That certainly doesn't fit with him turning right around and blaming the Romans for killing an innocent man. Now, we often hear Christians make the complaint that we're taking verses out of context, and most of the time it doesn't really change the meaning. But in this case, the context is important to understanding what Paul is saying. So why don't we go ahead and grab a few more phrases above the verse we just saw so we can have that immediate context? Because what Paul tells us there is going to be crucial in deciphering his meaning. And yet, I do speak of a wisdom for those who are mature, not a wisdom of this passing age, nor of the rulers of this age who are passing away. I speak of God's secret wisdom, a mystery that has been hidden and predestined by God for our glory before the ages. None of the rulers of this age understood it, for if they had, they would not have crucified the Lord of glory. The key to understanding what Paul meant involves an examination of the underlying Greek words as well as an examination of some supporting passages that will help solve this riddle. The Greek word translated as rulers here is archon, meaning rulers, commanders, chiefs, etc. Not a big mystery there. The Greek word translated as age, or in some instances as world, is aion, from which we get the Latin ion, and then the English word we're all familiar with, eon, meaning forever, an unbroken age, an eternity. The one thing aion does not represent is a generation of time, or a length of time roughly equal to a few decades or so. This is important to keep in mind as we continue to examine these passages. Aion usually meant an eternal stretch of time in one direction, or in this case, it meant the time from Paul's present day all the way back to the beginning of time, when the world was created. We are now seeing more cracks in the facade of Christian orthodoxy. Let's see if we can widen them a little more. Paul says that none of the rulers of the present aion, or age, understood God's plan of salvation, for if they had, they never would have killed Jesus. Two problems jump out at me instantly. One, if Paul is implicating the Jewish or Roman rulers here, how could the ones who killed Jesus be said to rule over an entire age or the entire world? The entire aion? The entire time from Paul's day backward in time to the beginning of the world? This is a huge clue that we need to keep in mind. If Paul had the Romans in mind here, I would have expected to see something like rulers of this generation, which would restrict it to a more believable time frame. Pilate could indeed rule for 40 years, but I seriously doubt he could rule for 4,000. And two, if the Romans or Jews knew that by killing Jesus they would be helping initiate God's plan of salvation, they would first have to believe in Jesus and the plan of salvation. In other words, be Christians. So they still would have done it. In fact, they would have even more reason to do it in order to bring about God's plan of salvation. But there is a group of rulers who would have hated to see God's plan of salvation put into effect, and these rulers were able to rule the entire world throughout history from the creation of the world all the way up to Paul's day. You can probably guess who I have in mind already. But let's keep digging because there's more gold to be found.